Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you. So let's begin. My name is Jamie. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. What they don't tell you is how satisfying it can be to watch someone who destroyed your world slowly realize they've been outplayed at their own game. When Kendall looked me in the eyes outside that courthouse and called me the devil, I smiled and told her the truth. She brought it out of me. But that moment was 7 years in the making. And every single day of those 7 years was worth it. Kendall was stunning in every way possible. Standing 5'7", she was the type of woman who could have had anyone. After years of marriage, I still felt lucky every morning when I woke up next to her. Her perfect smile had first captured my attention at a business networking event many years earlier. Our earlier life together was everything I'd imagined marriage could be. We had a beautiful 4-bedroom building in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city, complete with a 3-car garage. I worked in commercial real estate development, specializing in mixed-use projects that combined retail, office, and residential spaces. The business had been incredibly good to us over the years, particularly during the boom period when everyone wanted to live in walkable communities with upscale amenities. Kendall didn't need to work, but she kept herself busy with social events and activities that seemed to fulfill her need for purpose and recognition. Money wasn't an issue for us. I'd been smart about investments from early in my career, diversifying into commercial real estate holdings, blue-chip stock portfolios, municipal bonds, and private equity partnerships that had grown substantially over time. Our net worth was spread across various investment vehicles and business entities that I'd established for tax efficiency and asset protection. We lived comfortably, but not ostentatiously, though we certainly had more wealth accumulated than most people our age. Kendall knew about our financial situation in general terms. She understood that we were wealthy and that money wasn't something she needed to worry about. But she'd never been particularly interested in the details of how our wealth was structured or managed. She trusted me to handle the business side of our life while she focused on maintaining our home, managing our social calendar, and pursuing her charitable interests. This arrangement had worked well for both of us for years. I enjoyed the challenge and complexity of managing our investments and business interests, while Kendall excelled at creating the kind of lifestyle and social connections that enhanced both our personal happiness and my professional opportunities. After many years of being married, Kendall gradually became distant, but it became more pronounced over time. Suddenly, she was spending more time away from home, taking phone calls in private, and seeming distracted and not engaging even when we were together. The changes weren't dramatic enough to set off alarm bells initially. She was still engaging in the normal routines of our married life. But there was an underlying tension and preoccupation that hadn't been there before. When I asked her about the change in her behavior, she brushed off my concerns with vague explanations about being busy. She mentioned that some of her committee work had become more demanding, and that she was dealing with personality conflicts among the volunteers that made everything more complicated and time-consuming. I accepted these explanations initially because they seemed reasonable and because I trusted her completely. Kendall had always been deeply involved in her charitable work, and it made sense that increased responsibilities might create additional stress and require more of her attention. But the distance between us continued to grow over the following weeks. Our conversations became more superficial, focusing on practical matters like household schedules and social commitments, rather than the deeper, more personal discussions that had always been a hallmark of our relationship. Our physical intimacy decreased noticeably, with Kendall often claiming to be too tired or distracted for the kind of closeness we had always shared. Most troubling was the sense that her mind was somewhere else, even when we were spending time together. During our usual evening routine of sharing dinner and talking about our days, I could see that she was mentally absent, going through the motions of conversation while clearly thinking about something else entirely. After several weeks of this pattern, during which the distance between us had become impossible to ignore, I decided to press her more directly about what was bothering her. I chose a quiet Saturday evening when we were both home with no social commitments or distractions, opened a bottle of her favorite wine, and asked her to talk to me honestly about whatever was troubling her. I told her that I could sense something was fundamentally wrong, and that continuing to pretend otherwise wasn't helping either of us address whatever problem was causing her obvious distress. I explained that whatever the issue was, we could work through it together, but only if she was honest with me about what was happening in her life. Her initial response was the same dismissive reassurance she'd been giving me for weeks. She insisted that everything was fine and that I was overthinking the situation, reading problems into normal fluctuations in mood and energy that everyone experiences from time to time. But I could see the stress in her face and the way she avoided making direct eye contact while she spoke. I told her that I knew something was seriously wrong and that I could see what she was trying to hide. That's when she broke down completely into tears as she finally admitted that she had been having an affair. But the confession was only the beginning of a much more complicated and disturbing story that would reveal just how badly she had misjudged both me and the situation she had created. Through her tears, Kendall explained that she had been involved with someone for several months, and that what had started as an emotional connection had developed into a full physical relationship. But the affair had recently taken a dark and dangerous turn that was causing her enormous anxiety and fear. The man she'd been seeing had access to her private, intimate photos of their encounters, and he was now using those images to blackmail her for money and continued access. He had threatened to send the photos to me, to her family, and to the various organization boards she served on if she didn't comply with his escalating demands. She was terrified about what would happen if the photos became public, worried about the impact on both of our reputations and our marriage. The blackmailer had been escalating his demands, asking for larger amounts of money and threatening to send the images to me and others if she didn't comply with his requests. When I asked who the man was, her answer hit me like a physical blow. It was someone she had introduced me to months earlier at a get-together event. When I'd mentioned that I found him somewhat suspicious and didn't particularly like him because of how close he was to her that night, Kendall had laughed and told me not to worry about him, that he was harmless and just a friend. Learning that she had been cheating on me with someone I had specifically expressed concerns about made the betrayal feel even more deliberate and calculated. She had dismissed my instinct about this guy and continued seeing him behind my back, apparently developing an intimate relationship that had now turned into a criminal situation. I held myself together as she finished explaining the situation, trying not to show how completely this information was destroying me internally. The woman I had loved and trusted had not only been unfaithful, but had gotten herself into a dangerous situation with exactly the kind of person I had warned her to avoid. But beyond my personal devastation, I was also concerned about the criminal nature of what this guy was doing. Blackmail is a serious felony, and Kendall was being victimized regardless of how the situation had started. My immediate priority had to be protecting her from further harm, even though she had created the situation through her own choices. I told Kendall that we needed to contact my attorney immediately and involve law enforcement in handling the blackmail scheme. She was initially resistant, worried about the embarrassment and legal complications that might result from making the situation public. But I explained that paying blackmail never makes the problem go away. It only encourages the blackmailer to make additional demands. The only way to stop him was to have him arrested and prosecuted for his crimes. I assured her that we would handle the situation as discreetly as possible while still ensuring that justice was served. My lawyer was experienced in handling sensitive legal matters and understood the importance of discretion in our situation. He coordinated with law enforcement to build a case against the blackmailer using the threatening messages and financial demands that Kendall had received. The police investigation moved quickly once they had the evidence of the blackmail scheme. They were able to obtain warrants for his electronic devices and financial records, which provided additional proof of his criminal activity. The private photos he had taken of Kendall were recovered as evidence, ensuring they wouldn't be used against her in the future. When David was arrested, he initially tried to deny the blackmail allegations, claiming that any money Kendall had given him was voluntary and that their relationship had been consensual. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, including text messages explicitly threatening to release the photos and videos if his demands weren't met. The criminal case proceeded through the court system over several months, with a blackmailer eventually pleading guilty to blackmail charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. The resolution of the legal case meant that Kendall was no longer under threat, but it didn't address the underlying issues in our marriage. After the police had handled the criminal aspects of the situation, Kendall began using every opportunity to ask me to forgive her for the affair. She was clearly terrified that I was going to end our marriage and seemed desperate to rebuild our relationship. I actually did think seriously about divorce during this period. The betrayal had been devastating, and I wasn't sure that I could ever trust her again after what had happened. The affair itself was painful enough, but the fact that she had chosen this guy despite my warnings made it feel like a deliberate rejection of my judgment and concerns. But as I considered my options, I began to think more strategically about the financial implications of an immediate divorce. Our assets had grown significantly over the years of our marriage, and Kendall would be entitled to a substantial portion of our wealth in a divorce settlement. If I filed for divorce while emotions were running high and the affair was fresh, she would likely receive close to half of everything we had built together. That would mean losing millions of dollars to someone who had betrayed our marriage and ignored my explicit concerns about the man she chose to have an affair with. I realized that I could potentially protect more of our assets if I took time to restructure our finances before filing for divorce. It would require careful planning and legal maneuvering, but it might be possible to minimize Kendall's claim on the wealth I had worked so hard to accumulate. The more I thought about this approach, the more appealing it became. Kendall had made her choices without considering the impact on me or our marriage. Why shouldn't I make my choices based on what is best for my financial future? When Kendall suggested that we seek marriage counseling to work through our problems, I agreed immediately. Counseling would serve two purposes. It would give me time to restructure our assets, and it would demonstrate to any future court that I had made good faith efforts to save our marriage. I began masking my pain and anger, presenting myself as a husband who was willing to work through our problems despite the devastating betrayal I had experienced. Kendall seemed relieved and grateful that I wasn't abandoning her during what she characterized as the lowest point in her life. But while I was playing the role of the forgiving husband in counseling sessions and private conversations, I was also working with my attorney and financial advisors to begin the complex process of asset protection and restructuring. The key was to make changes that appeared to be legitimate business and investment decisions rather than obvious attempts to hide assets from a potential divorce settlement. Everything had to be done carefully and legally, with proper documentation and justifiable business reasons. I started by establishing new business entities and investment vehicles that were structured to provide better tax advantages and asset protection. For assets that have Kendall's involvement, I convinced her that these changes were necessary to optimize our financial position and protect our wealth from potential lawsuits or economic downturns. Over the following months, I gradually moved assets into these new structures, always with legitimate business justifications that would stand up to legal scrutiny. Kendall was aware of the general outlines of what I was doing because I presented it as a way to improve our financial situation, but she didn't understand the implications for how assets would be divided in the event of a divorce. The process required getting Kendall to sign various legal documents transferring her interests in certain properties and investments to the new business entities. I presented these signatures as routine administrative tasks required for the restructuring, and she signed them without much scrutiny because she trusted me to handle our financial affairs. One of the most important documents I got her to sign was a power of attorney, giving me broad authority to manage all of our investments and business interests. I explained this as a practical necessity for implementing the restructuring efficiently, and she agreed to sign it without consulting her own attorney. The marriage counseling continued throughout this period, with both of us attending sessions regularly and working through the prescribed exercises for rebuilding trust and communication. Kendall was putting significant effort into the process, clearly hoping that we could repair our relationship and move forward together. She showered me with praise for not leaving her during her darkest hour, expressing gratitude that I was willing to work through our problems rather than abandoning our marriage. She seemed remorseful about the affair and committed to rebuilding the trust she had broken. I watched her efforts and smiled when it seemed appropriate, playing my role as the wounded but forgiving husband. But internally, I was focused on the long-term plan that would protect the assets I had worked so hard to accumulate over the years. The financial restructuring was a complex process that required careful coordination between my attorney, accountant, and investment advisors. Every change had to be documented properly and justified with legitimate business reasons that would withstand legal challenge. Some of the restructuring involved moving assets into business entities where Kendall had no legal interest. Other strategies involved international investment vehicles and offshore structures that provided additional layers of protection. All of these moves were legal and properly documented, but they would significantly complicate any attempt to identify and value marital assets in a divorce proceeding. The entire process took approximately 6 years to complete. During that time, I continued to play the role of the reconciling husband while systematically protecting our wealth from potential division in divorce proceedings. Kendall never suspected what I was really doing because the financial moves all appeared to be legitimate business activities designed to optimize our investment returns and tax situation. She was focused on rebuilding our relationship and seemed genuinely happy that we were working through our problems together. By the time I was confident that all of the asset protection strategies were fully implemented and legally secure, Kendall believed that our marriage had been successfully repaired. She thought we had moved past the affair and rebuilt our relationship on a stronger foundation. That's when I filed for divorce, which came as a complete surprise to her. The papers were served while she was at home, and she called me in a panic, asking what was happening and why I was ending our marriage after years of successful counseling. I calmly explained that I had never actually forgiven her for the affair and that the counseling had been part of my process for deciding how to move forward. I told her that I had concluded our marriage couldn't be repaired and that I was ready to begin the next chapter of my life. When Kendall tried to hire a divorce attorney, she quickly discovered that she didn't have access to most of our assets. The financial restructuring I had implemented over the previous 6 years had moved the majority of our wealth into business entities and investment vehicles where she had no legal claim. The power of attorney she had signed, giving me authority to manage our investments, meant that she couldn't access accounts or make changes to our financial arrangements without my consent. She was essentially locked out of the wealth she had assumed would be available to her in divorce proceedings. She managed to find a lawyer who was willing to represent her on a contingency basis, but as the divorce progressed, it became clear that her legal options were severely limited by the financial structures I had put in place. Her attorney tried various legal strategies to challenge the asset transfers and business restructuring, arguing that they had been done in anticipation of divorce and should be reversed by the court. But because the transfers had been implemented over the years and had legitimate business justifications, they were much harder to challenge than if they had been done immediately before filing for divorce. The more the legal proceedings continued, the more Kendall realized that I had never actually forgiven her, and that the years of counseling and apparent reconciliation had been part of a long-term strategy to protect my assets from a divorce settlement. She became increasingly angry and desperate as she understood the full scope of what I had done. The woman who had betrayed our marriage and ignored my warnings was now experiencing the consequences of trusting someone who had been planning her financial destruction for years. The divorce proceedings took over a year to complete, with Kendall's attorneys fighting every aspect of the asset division and challenging the validity of the financial structures I had created. But their legal challenges were largely unsuccessful because the restructuring had been done properly and over an extended period of time. When the divorce was finally concluded, Kendall received a settlement that was a fraction of what she would have gotten if I had filed immediately after discovering her affair. Instead of receiving millions of dollars in assets, she walked away with enough money to maintain a modest lifestyle, but nothing approaching the wealth she had expected. On the final day of court proceedings, when all the paperwork was signed and our marriage was officially dissolved, I happened to encounter Kendall outside the courthouse. She looked me directly in the eyes with an expression of pure hatred and called me the devil. Her voice was filled with venom and rage as she accused me of being a monster, who had destroyed her life through calculated manipulation and cruelty. I smiled at her and told her the truth, that she had brought out this side of me through her own choices and actions. I explained that I had never been the devil, until she made me become one through her betrayal and her decision to ignore my warnings about her lover. I reminded her that everything I had done was legal, and that she had participated willingly in all of the financial decisions that had led to her current situation. She had trusted me to handle our business affairs, just as I had trusted her to honor our marriage vows, and we had both learned the consequences of misplaced trust. Walking away from that courthouse, I felt a satisfaction that was deeper and more complete than any emotion I had experienced in years. The woman who had betrayed me with someone I had specifically warned her about had finally faced the consequences of her choices. The 7 years I had spent planning and executing this strategy had been worth every moment of careful acting and strategic patience. Kendall had destroyed our marriage through her affair, but I had destroyed her financial future through superior planning and execution. Some people might consider what I did to be cruel or excessive, but I saw it as simple justice. She had made her choice to betray our marriage, and I had made my choice about how to respond to that betrayal. The difference was that I had been smarter about the long-term consequences of my actions. The beautiful woman who had once made me feel like the luckiest man in the world had taught me valuable lessons about trust, betrayal, and the importance of protecting yourself from people who don't have your best interests at heart. She had broken my heart, but in the process, she had also made me much more strategic and ruthless than I had ever been before. Today, I'm financially secure and emotionally free from someone who had proven herself unworthy of my trust and love. The devil she accused me of being was simply the man she had created through her own choices and actions. Revenge might be a dish best served cold, but it's also a dish that tastes better when it's been carefully prepared over many years with the finest ingredients of patience, strategy, and superior planning. Kendall had wanted to play games with our marriage, so I played a much better game with our assets. In the end, we both got exactly what we deserved based on the choices we made and the games we decided to play. The only difference is that I played my game better than she played hers, and the scoreboard was measured in millions of dollars rather than fleeting moments of passion with someone who turned out to be a criminal. The woman who called me the devil learned too late that sometimes the devil wins because he's smarter, more patient, and better at long-term planning than the people who create him. She brought out the worst in me. But fortunately for me, my worst was much more effective than her worst had been.